Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're headed to north central Montana,
Oh, exciting.
yet to a place called the Sweetgrass Hills.
I've heard of those.
Have you?
Yeah.
There are these three buttes rising right up out of the plains, and they're pretty close to the Canadian border.
Oh, wow.
So, what we're going to try to uncover in this deep dive is uh, why these hills were so important,
Okay.
culturally and spiritually, to Native Americans.
Interesting.
And not just in the past, but also in the present.
Gotcha.
So, to do that, we're going to be drawing on a really cool mix of sources.
Like what?
So we've got geography, geology, some firsthand accounts from explorers.
Oh, cool.
We've got stories from tribal elders, and then we're also going to be weaving in some archaeological findings.
That sounds really fascinating.
It is really cool, yeah. So to start off, when you picture the Sweetgrass Hills, it's really something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they just kind of appear out of nowhere on these plains. And the highest peaks are almost 7,000 feet.
Yeah, that's right. And that elevation, that's really key here.
Yeah.
So you've got these plains, right?
Yeah.
And they're baking in the sun in the summertime, and then you go up into these hills and it's a totally different environment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's what we call a high montane zone.
A montane zone.
Yeah, so think like cooler temperatures,
Oh, and
forests of like pine and aspen, and you even get plants and animals that you wouldn't see anywhere else in the area.
oh, that's so cool. So it's like this little island
Yeah.
of mountain, basically, right in the middle of all this prairie.
Yeah. And it wasn't just a refuge from the heat either. I mean,
Right.
geologically, they're pretty special too. For example, they have
Go on.
the northernmost exposures of something called Mississippian age Madison limestone in Montana.
Mississippian age.
Yeah,
That sounds old.
it is really old.
What is it and why is it important?
Well, you don't usually find it in this part of Montana, for one thing. It formed millions of years ago, like you said, under a shallow sea,
Ah.
and it's known for forming caves.
Ooh.
Caves. All right. So are there caves in the Sweetgrass Hills?
Yeah, there are. And there are two that are particularly interesting. They're called Devil's Chimney Cave and Seven Rooms Cave.
Oh, those sound spooky. Were those caves important to the Native Americans who lived in the area?
Absolutely. Both Devil's Chimney and Seven Rooms, they have evidence that they were used by Native Americans, both prehistoric and historic.
I see.
And, caves often had spiritual significance. People saw them as
Imagine.
portals to the underworld or places of power, but we'll dig into that more a little bit later.
Okay, we'll say that for later.
For
Okay.
now, just imagine, these secret spaces hidden within the hills.
Very cool. All right, so we've talked about the Sweetgrass Hills today and how unique they are, rising up from these plains.
Yeah.
We've talked about the plant and animal life, but let's zoom out a little bit and think about how these hills were shaped over time.
Okay.
And for that, we've got to go way back to the Ice Age.
All right.
So picture massive ice sheets.
I know, right? Thousands of feet thick, covering huge parts of North America. These were the glaciers of what we call the Wisconsin Advance,
Wow.
and they reached their peak around 20,000 years ago.
So were the Sweetgrass Hills covered by these glaciers?
Well, not entirely.
Okay.
They were tall enough that they weren't completely buried. The ice sheets kind of surrounded the hills, leaving only the highest peaks sticking out.
So like islands in a sea of ice.
Exactly.
Wow. So what kind of impact did these glaciers have on the landscape?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot as they moved, they carved out valleys, they left behind rocks and debris, and they even created those kettle lakes that we see today.
That's incredible. It's amazing to think about those forces shaping the land.
It is. And it's those very sources that shaped the Sweetgrass Hills into the unique place they are today, a place that became so important to Native American cultures.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this awesome landscape shaped by ancient glaciers.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the plants, especially in that high montane zone.
Okay, sure. So yeah, the vegetation in the Sweetgrass Hills is so cool because it's this mix of prairie and montane species, right?
Yeah.
So, as you go up from the grasslands, you start to see forests of ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and aspen.
Right.
These trees gave the people shelter, fuel, and materials for tools and building.
Okay, but what about food? What do they eat?
Oh, the Sweetgrass Hills were amazing for hunter-gatherers. You had all sorts of berries: Canada, buffalo berry, chokecherry, and huckleberries.
Sound delicious.
And then for root crops, they had biscuit root, wild onion, and balsam root.
I love wild onions.
Yeah, and these plants weren't just food.
Right, yeah,
They had medicinal uses too.
of course. Were there any plants that were especially important, like culturally or spiritually important.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Sweetgrass, which is what the hills are named after,
Makes sense.
was and still is super sacred to lots of tribes.
I see.
They used it in ceremonies and for purification.
I see.
And remember that limestone we talked about earlier?
Yeah. The one that forms the caves.
Yeah. Well, that limestone itself was a source of pigments that they used for art and rituals.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So we've got this incredible landscape
Yeah.
shaped by glaciers.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this unique high montane zone. We've got caves shrouded in mystery.
Right.
And we've got all this awesome plant life that was used for food, for medicine, and for all sorts of cultural and spiritual purposes.
Exactly. No wonder the Sweetgrass Hills were so important to Native Americans.
Yeah, it really is a special place.
Right.
But it wasn't just about the environment.
Yeah,
There's a human story here, too.
definitely.
A story of resourcefulness and conflict and this really amazing, enduring connection to this place.
And that's where things get even more interesting. So we can move beyond just the environment now and really start looking at the people who lived in the Sweetgrass Hills.
Okay, I'm ready to meet the people who called this remarkable landscape home.
Let's go. So we've been talking about this high montane zone, right?
Yeah, like this little oasis in the middle of the prairie.
Right, exactly. But it wasn't just appealing to the plants and animals.
Of course, yeah, people would love that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It drew people in too. And the Sweetgrass Hills weren't just a place for people to survive, you know?
Right.
They were a place to really thrive. And they became the center of cultural and spiritual life for Native Americans.
For all sorts of different tribes or...
For variety, yeah.
Okay, so who exactly are we talking about? Like, who were these people and what kind of evidence did they leave behind?
Well, archaeologists have been busy, and
Right.
they found evidence of a lot of different tribes using the Sweetgrass Hills.
Okay.
And they've all left their mark on the landscape in different ways.
So, like, give me some names. Who are we talking about here?
Well, of course, there's the Blackfeet, but there's also signs of the Gros Ventre, the Assiniboine, the Cree,
Wow.
and even some evidence of the Shoshone and the Crow using the area every now and then.
So it was a real crossroads.
It really was, yeah, a real mix of cultures.
I bet that led to some interesting interaction.
It did. I mean, it wasn't always peaceful, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. People competing for resources and all that.
Exactly. Especially after horses and guns came on the scene.
Things probably got a little tense.
Oh, for sure. There were definitely conflicts. But there's also evidence that they cooperated and exchanged ideas.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just fighting all the time.
No, not at all. The Sweetgrass Hills were like this place where different groups could come together, trade, share ideas.
Maybe even form alliances.
Exactly.
It's really cool to think about.
It is. It's more than just survival, right?
Yeah.
It's about building relationships and navigating a shared landscape.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
So we've talked about the people, but what about those marks they left on the landscape? What kind of archaeological sites are we talking about?
Well, there's a whole range, and they give us these amazing little glimpses into their lives.
Oh, cool. Tell me more.
So in the lower elevations, they found evidence of tippy rings.
Tippy rings?
Yeah, you know those circles of stones that marked the bases of their dwellings?
Oh, right. Of course.
And they're usually clustered near water sources or those important plant communities we talked about.
Makes sense. They'd want to be close to the resources they need.
Exactly. They also found stone tools, pottery fragments, and even fire hearths.
It's like stepping back in time.
It really is. You can almost picture families gathering around the fire, making tools, telling stories under the stars.
I love it. So it wasn't all just about everyday life, right?
Yeah.
Didn't we talk about how the Sweetgrass Hills had this spiritual significance?
We did, yeah. And that's where things get even more interesting. So besides those everyday campsites, we find sites that point to something much deeper, something more profound.
Like what? I'm hooked.
Like high up on the ridges and peaks,
Yeah.
overlooking the plains, you find these stone enclosures.
Stone enclosures. What are those?
They're low, oval, or U-shaped structures made with stacked rocks.
And what were they used for?
Well, they're not dwellings, that's for sure. Archaeologists think they were used for ceremonies, vision quests, solitary rituals.
Oh, wow. So they were like sacred spaces.
Exactly. They're often in spots with amazing views, and they seem to have been used for connecting with the spirits, seeking guidance.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got this picture of Native American life in the Sweetgrass Hills, everyday life, and this deep spiritual connection to the land.
Right.
But then, of course, things changed.
They did, yeah.
Gold rush.
You got it. While these hills meant so much to Native Americans,
Uh-huh.
European settlers arrived in the late 1800s and, well, they had different ideas.
They're looking for gold.
Exactly. And one of the buttes, Gold Butte,
Makes sense.
became a big center for mining.
So prospectors everywhere, I bet.
Everywhere, all hoping to strike it rich.
Did they find much gold?
Some, but the impact on the landscape and the Native Americans was huge.
Yeah, it must have been a real clash of cultures.
It was. Two very different ways of seeing the world.
For sure. So the story of the Sweetgrass Hills isn't just ancient history, is it?
It's not. It's a story that continues to this day with its own complexities and challenges.
This is getting good. I'm ready to hear how this story evolved and what the Sweetgrass Hills represent today. Okay, so we've explored the Sweetgrass Hills from the Ice Age to the Gold Rush. But as you said, the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
So what happened after the Gold Rush faded? What happened to the Sweetgrass Hills and the people who considered them sacred?
Well, even though the gold rush ended, its impacts were long-lasting.
Right.
The influx of settlers really changed things.
Yeah.
Native Americans were displaced, they lost their traditional lands,
Yeah.
and their way of life was disrupted.
It's a sad story, but it's important to remember
It is, yes.
so that we can appreciate how strong their connection to the Sweetgrass Hills really is.
Exactly. It's a testament to their resilience.
Right, because you said their connection endured, right?
It did, yes.
So how did they manage to hold on to that connection in the face of so much change?
It's really inspiring, actually. They held on through sheer determination, They kept
Yeah.
their cultural memory alive,
Uh-huh.
and they never lost that deep belief in the sacredness of this place.
So even with all that pressure to assimilate and abandon their traditions,
Yeah,
they kept their stories and knowledge alive.
they did, yeah.
And they passed down their reverence for the Sweetgrass Hills to future generations.
Exactly.
It's incredible.
It really is.
So how are they safeguarding their connection today? Like, what are they doing now?
Well, they're fighting for their rights,
Yeah.
for access to their sacred sites, and for the preservation of their heritage.
So they're actively involved in protecting these places.
Oh, absolutely. Many tribes are working hard to document their knowledge,
Right.
to educate younger generations, and to advocate for policies that protect their cultural landscapes.
So it's a story of continuity and change.
Yeah,
This blending of ancient traditions with the modern world.
it really is. And it's a story that's still being written, and it needs our understanding, respect, and a willingness to listen to the voices of those who have cherished this place for so long.
It's a story that reminds us that landscapes are so much more than just rocks and trees.
Exactly. They hold stories, beliefs, and memories.
Yeah.
And when we take the time to listen,
Yeah.
we gain a much richer understanding of the world around us.
I love that. So, for our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring the story of the Sweetgrass Hills.
Yeah.
Learn about the tribes who hold them dear.
It's a powerful story.
It really is. It speaks to the power of place,
Oh.
the resilience of culture,
Yes.
and the importance of understanding and respecting the interconnectedness of all things.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the heart of the Sweetgrass Hills